Some people navigate life as if their hearts were porous, absorbing the pain of others. Like a sponge, their own edges blurring in the process. They offer empathy so freely it becomes a reflex, a quiet surrender of self to the needs of those around them. Yet beneath this noble act of understanding lies a shadow, a subtle betrayal not of others, but of the one who gives too much. In the teachings of Carl Jung, this dance of empathy and self-betrayal unveils a profound psychological truth. To truly connect with another, one must first anchor in the depths of their own soul. When empathy becomes a mask for avoiding the self, it risks fracturing the very foundation of individuation, the sacred journey toward wholeness. Consider the empath and archetype as ancient as the collective unconscious itself. This figure, often cloaked in kindness, feels the tremors of another's suffering as if it were their own. Their heart beats in rhythm with the world's sorrows, their intuition a compass for navigating the unspoken. Jung might see them as carriers of the anima or animus, the soul's mirror, reflecting the inner worlds of others with uncanny precision. Yet this gift, when unchecked, becomes a perilous tightrope. The empath, in their longing to heal, to soothe, to understand, may lose sight of their own boundaries, their own story. Their ego, desperate to maintain harmony, projects their unacknowledged wounds onto others, mistaking self-sacrifice for love. Have you ever felt this pull, this quiet urge to dissolve into someone else's pain, as if by saving them, you might save a piece of yourself? In Jungian terms, the shadow, the repository of all that is denied or repressed, whispers a subtle warning here. The empath's shadow is not malice or cruelty, but the refusal to honor their own needs, the fear of claiming space in a world that demands their care. Attachment theory, a modern lens on the psyche's relational dance, echoes this. Those with anxious or disorganized attachment patterns often lean into hyper-empathy, seeking validation through the act of giving. They fear that to pause to turn inward is to risk abandonment. So they pour themselves out, believing their worth lies in how much they can carry for others. But what happens when the vessel runs dry? What happens when the empath's own pain, neglected and buried, begins to seep through the cracks? Jung's concept of individuation demands a reckoning with this shadow. To become whole, one must confront the parts of the self that have been exiled, the anger, the need, the hunger for recognition. Empathy, when it becomes a shield against these truths, betrays the self's deeper calling. It is not enough to feel for another. One must also feel for the self, to cradle the ego not as a tyrant, but as a fragile, necessary guide. The empath who ignores this risks becoming a martyr, their identity tethered to the suffering they absorb. In this act, they inadvertently project their unhealed wounds onto the world, seeking redemption through others' healing rather than their own. Pause for a moment and consider, when was the last time you turned your empathy inward? When did you last listen to the quiet ache within your own chest, the one you've drowned out with the noise of others' needs? The Jungian path is not one of self-abandonment, but of integration. The empath must learn to hold both their own pain and the pain of others without collapsing under the weight. This is no small task. It requires courage to face the shadow, to ask what lies beneath the compulsion to give. Is it love, or is it fear? Is it connection, or is it a plea for belonging? The collective unconscious, Jung taught, binds us all in a web of shared archetypes and experiences. The empath, in their sensitivity, taps into this reservoir, feeling the currents of humanity's joys and sorrows. Yet without grounding in their own individuality, they risk being swept away. Modern psychology underscores this with the concept of self-worth. True empathy flows from a place of inner security, not depletion. To give without losing oneself is to walk the razor's edge between compassion and self-betrayal. The empath must learn to discern when their heart's openness serves the soul's growth and when it becomes a quiet act of self-erasure. This journey, as Jung would remind us, is not about perfection, but about awareness. The empath who begins to see their shadow, to honor their own boundaries, steps closer to individuation. They learn that empathy, when rooted in self-understanding, becomes a bridge rather than a sacrifice. The world does not need more martyrs. It needs souls who can hold both light and shadow, who can love others without losing themselves. The empath's journey, like a river carving through stone, is both relentless and revelatory. It flows from the heart's desire to connect, yet it risks eroding the self when empathy becomes a substitute for self-knowledge. In the Jungian cosmos, where archetypes dance and the psyche whispers its truths, the empath stands as a figure of profound paradox, both healer and wounded, both bridge and abyss. To give oneself wholly to another's pain is to court the shadow's quiet betrayal, where the ego's need for love masquerades as boundless compassion. The path to wholeness. Jung reminds us, demands a reckoning, not with the world, but with the unseen corners of the soul. Consider the moment when empathy unchecked becomes a mirror for projection. The empath, attuned to the tremors of another's heart, may see in their suffering a reflection of their own unacknowledged wounds. Jung's concept of projection illuminates this: what we cannot face within ourselves, we cast onto others. The friend's despair, the partner's anger, the stranger's grief. These become canvases for the empath's unresolved pain. In their rush to soothe, to understand, they bypass their own story, believing that healing another will somehow mend the fractures within. Yet this is a deception of the ego, a sleight of hand that keeps the shadow at bay. Have you ever caught yourself pouring energy into someone else's struggle, only to feel a hollowness you couldn't name? That ache, that fleeting emptiness, is the soul's quiet plea to be seen. Attachment theory offers a modern echo to this ancient truth. Those who lean into hyper-empathy often carry the weight of early wounds, perhaps a childhood where love was earned through caretaking, where safety came from anticipating others' needs. The anxious heart learns to prioritize the other, believing that self-neglect is the currency of connection. But Jung would argue that this is not connection, it is a transaction, a bartering of self-worth for fleeting approval. The shadow grows heavier with each act of self-betrayal, whispering resentment, exhaustion, and a quiet rage that the empath dares not acknowledge. To face this shadow is to ask, what am I avoiding in myself when I dive so deeply into another's pain? Individuation. Jung's sacred process of becoming demands that the empath turn inward. This is not a call to abandon compassion, but to anchor it in self-awareness. The ego, often maligned as selfish, is not the enemy. Here it is the vessel through which the self navigates the world. To neglect it is to risk fragmentation, where the empath becomes a mosaic of others' needs, their own identity scattered like shards of glass. The work of individuation requires courage to set boundaries, to say no, to honor the self as fiercely as one honors others. This is where the collective unconscious comes into play, that vast reservoir of shared human experience. The empath, so attuned to its currents, must learn to distinguish their own voice from the chorus of humanity's pain. Pause and reflect when you give. Do you give from a place of fullness or from a fear of emptiness? The difference is subtle but seismic. Modern psychology speaks of self-worth as the foundation of healthy relationships, and Jung would nod in agreement. To love another without losing oneself is to walk the path of integration, where empathy becomes an act of strength rather than sacrifice. The empath who learns to hold their own pain alongside another's discovers a profound truth. Compassion does not require self-erasure. It requires presence rooted in the hard-won knowledge of one's own depths. Yet this is no easy task. The shadow resists exposure, cloaking itself in noble excuses. They need me, the empath whispers, as if their own needs are a lesser currency. But Jung's wisdom cuts through this illusion. To deny the self is to deny the divine spark within the unique imprint of the soul. The empath must learn to dance with their shadow, to ask what it seeks to teach. Is it fear of rejection? A longing for belonging? The answers lie not in giving more, but in listening more to the self, to the quiet truths buried beneath the compulsion to save. This dance is not solitary. The collective unconscious binds us all, and the empath's gift is their ability to feel this connection. Yet they must learn to stand apart, to claim their individuality without guilt. The world does not ask for martyrs. It asks for souls who can hold both light and shadow, who can offer empathy without losing their center. To betray oneself in the name of compassion is to dim the very light that could illuminate another's path. The empath's true power lies not in how much they can carry, but in how deeply they can know themselves. The empath's heart, like a lantern in the fog, casts light on the world's hidden wounds, illuminating paths others cannot see. Yet this light, when turned outward without restraint, risks dimming the soul's own flame. In the Jungian tapestry where archetypes weave the human story, the empath treads a delicate line between compassion and self-betrayal. To give endlessly, to absorb another's pain as if it were their own, is to flirt with the shadow's seductive pull, a pull that whispers worth is found in sacrifice. But Jung's vision of individuation demands otherwise. To truly serve the world, one must first claim the sacred ground of the self. The shadow, that repository of all the psyche denies, is not a villain but a teacher. For the empath, it often manifests as the unspoken resentment that festers beneath their giving. They may smile, nod, and listen, but deep within a quiet voice protests. What about me? This voice ignored grows louder, manifesting as exhaustion, bitterness, or a sudden collapse under the weight of others' needs. Jung would see this as the psyche's cry for balance, a call to integrate the shadow's lessons. The empath's shadow is not cruelty, but the refusal to honor their own boundaries, the fear that saying no will shatter the fragile bonds they've woven. Have you ever felt that pang, that moment when your heart says yes, but your soul whispers no? That tension is the shadow knocking, demanding to be seen. Modern psychology, through the lens of attachment theory, offers clarity here. Those who lean into hyper-empathy often carry blueprints from early relationships, perhaps a caregiver whose love was conditional, or a childhood where peace was maintained by anticipating others' needs. The empath learns to become a chameleon, adapting to the emotional hues of those around them. But this adaptation, while a survival skill, becomes a trap in adulthood. The ego, desperate for connection, sacrifices authenticity for approval, projecting the empath's own unhealed wounds onto others. They may see a friend struggle and rush to fix it, not out of pure compassion, but to soothe their own fear of being unneeded. This is the subtle alchemy of self-betrayal, where empathy becomes a mask for avoiding the self. Individuation. Jung's path to wholeness requires the empath to confront this dynamic. It is not enough to feel deeply. One must also understand why. The collective unconscious, that vast ocean of shared human experience, pulses through the empath's sensitivity. They sense the archetypes at play: the wounded child, the abandoned lover, the seeking hero in themselves and others. Yet without grounding in their own individuality, they risk drowning in this collective tide. To individuate is to carve out a space where the self is sovereign, where empathy flows from strength rather than depletion. This means facing the uncomfortable truth. Sometimes the most compassionate act is to step back, to let others carry their own burdens. Consider this when you rush to save another. Are you honoring their journey, or are you fleeing your own? The empath's compulsion to give often stems from a belief that their worth lies in their utility. But Jung's wisdom cuts deeper. Worth is not earned through sacrifice. It is inherent in the soul's unique spark. The empath must learn to hold their own pain with the same tenderness they offer others. This is shadow work in its rawest form, sitting with the discomfort of saying no, of prioritizing the self, of trusting that boundaries do not diminish love, but deepen it. The interplay of archetypes here is profound. The empath may embody the caregiver pouring love into the world, but they must also embrace the warrior who defends their own boundaries, and the sage who seeks wisdom within. To neglect these other facets is to live half a life fragmented by the fear of disappointing others. Modern self-worth psychology aligns with this. True connection arises from authenticity, not self-erasure. The empath who learns to balance giving and receiving becomes a beacon, not a martyr. Their empathy, rooted in self-awareness, becomes a gift that uplifts without draining. This path is not without struggle. The shadow resists integration, cloaking itself in guilt or the fear of being seen as selfish. Yet Jung reminds us that the psyche craves wholeness, not perfection. The empath who dares to face their shadow, who asks, "What do I need?" begins to weave a new story. They learn that empathy, when tempered with self-respect, is a bridge to authentic connection. The world does not need their exhaustion. It needs their presence, their light, their courage to stand whole amid the chaos of human pain. To betray oneself is to dim that light. To honor oneself is to let it shine. The empath's soul, like a vessel adrift in the collective unconscious, sails through currents of shared human longing, grief, and hope. Their gift is to feel these tides deeply, to sense the unspoken aches that bind humanity. Yet in this vast sea, the empath risks losing their own compass, their own North Star. When empathy becomes a reflex, a surrender to the needs of others, it carves a silent wound within a betrayal, not of the world, but of the self's sacred calling. Jung's vision of individuation whispers a challenge to love others without losing oneself. One must first navigate the labyrinth of their own psyche, where shadow and light entwine. The shadow Jung taught is not merely a repository of flaws, but a mirror reflecting what the ego dares not face. For the empath, this shadow often takes the form of unspoken resentment, a quiet rebellion against the endless giving that leaves them depleted. They may wear a mask of serenity, but beneath it the psyche churns with questions. Why am I always the one to carry this weight? Why do I feel so unseen? These are not signs of failure, but signals from the soul urging integration. The empath's shadow is not a lack of compassion, but a fear of claiming their own space, a belief that their worth is tied to how much they can endure. To face this shadow is to ask, what am I hiding from when I prioritize another's pain over my own? Attachment theory, a modern companion to Jung's insights, reveals the roots of this pattern. Many empaths carry the imprint of early relationships where love was a transaction earned through caretaking, secured by silencing their own needs. The anxious heart learns to anticipate, to soothe, to become indispensable, believing this will guard against abandonment. But this is a fragile pact. The ego, desperate for connection, projects its own unhealed wounds onto others, seeking validation through their healing. The empath may rush to mend a friend's sorrow not solely out of love, but to quiet their own fear of being unlovable. This is the subtle trap of self-betrayal, where empathy becomes a shield against the self's deeper truths. Individuation demands a turning point, a moment when the empath pauses to listen to their own heart. This is not selfishness, but a reclamation of the self as a sacred vessel. Jung's collective unconscious reminds us that we are all woven into the same archetypal tapestry, yet each thread must hold its own color, its own strength. The empath, so attuned to the world's pain, must learn to distinguish their own voice from the chorus. This requires courage to set boundaries, to say no, to trust that their worth does not hinge on how much they give. Have you ever felt the weight of a yes that should have been a no? That moment, fleeting and uncomfortable, is the psyche's invitation to grow, to integrate the shadow and step closer to wholeness. The archetypes at play here are vivid. The empath often embodies the caregiver, nurturing and selfless, but they must also awaken the lover, not in romance alone, but in fierce devotion to their own soul. The warrior, too, must rise, guarding the boundaries that keep the self intact. Without these, the empath risks becoming a vessel for others' pain, their own story submerged. Modern psychology underscores this with the concept of self-compassion. To give authentically, one must first receive from within. The empath who learns to cradle their own wounds with the same tenderness they offer others discovers a profound alchemy. Empathy becomes a bridge, not a sacrifice. This path is fraught with tension. The shadow resists exposure, whispering guilt or fear of rejection. If I say no, will they leave? If I prioritize myself, will I be alone? Yet Jung's wisdom cuts through the soul's journey, is not about pleasing others, but about becoming whole. The empath who dares to face these fears begins to weave a new narrative, one where empathy is an act of strength, not depletion. They learn that true connection flows from authenticity, from a heart that knows its own worth. The collective unconscious, with its shared dreams and archetypes, does not demand self-erasure. It calls for individuality for souls who can stand in their truth while holding space for others. The empath's gift, when balanced, is a beacon in the dark. Their ability to feel the world's pulse is a sacred bridge to understanding. But to betray oneself in the name of empathy is to dim that light, to offer a half-truth to the world. The journey of individuation asks for more: to love deeply, yes, but to love oneself with equal fervor. Only then can the empath's compassion become a force of transformation, rooted in the soul's unyielding truth. The empath's heart, a vessel of exquisite sensitivity, trembles with the undercurrents of the collective unconscious, where the joys and sorrows of humanity converge. Like a poet transcribing the world's unspoken verses, they feel the pulse of others' lives, grief, hope, fear, woven into their own. Yet this gift, when poured out without discernment, becomes a quiet theft, stealing from the self what is owed to the soul. In Jung's vision, the path to individuation is not a selfless surrender, but a fierce reclamation of the self's sovereignty. When empathy becomes a reflex to avoid one's own depths, it betrays the sacred work of becoming whole. The shadow Jung's mirror of the repressed holds a particular truth for the empath. It is not their kindness that betrays them, but their refusal to honor their own boundaries, their fear that claiming space will fracture the connections they cherish. This shadow often manifests as a quiet exhaustion, a resentment that simmers beneath the surface when their giving goes unreciprocated. The empath may smile, may listen, may hold space for another's pain, but within a voice whispers, "When is it my turn to be seen?" This is the psyche's protest, a call to integrate the shadow's wisdom. To ignore it is to deepen the betrayal, to let the ego's need for approval eclipse the soul's need for authenticity. Have you ever felt that quiet ache, the one that lingers after giving more than you had to give? That ache is the shadow's invitation, urging you to turn inward. Attachment theory sheds light on this dynamic, revealing how early relationships shape the empath's compulsion to give. Those raised in environments where love was contingent, earned through caretaking or emotional labor, learn to equate self-worth with utility. The ego, desperate to secure belonging, projects this need onto others, seeking validation through their healing. The empath may dive into a friend's crisis, not solely out of compassion, but to silence their own fear of being unneeded. This is where self-betrayal takes root, where empathy becomes a mask for avoiding the self's deeper wounds. Jung would see this as a failure to differentiate, to separate one's own identity from the collective tide of human need. Individuation. The heart of Jung's philosophy demands a reckoning with this pattern. To become whole, the empath must learn to hold their own pain with the same reverence they offer others. This is not a call to abandon empathy, but to anchor it in self-awareness. The collective unconscious, with its archetypes of the wounded healer, the caregiver, and the seeker, flows through the empath's sensitivity. Yet without grounding in their own individuality, they risk becoming a vessel for the world's pain, their own story submerged. To individuate is to claim one's unique thread in the tapestry of humanity, to say, "I am here, and my needs matter too." This requires courage, the courage to set boundaries, to disappoint others, to trust that true connection does not demand self-erasure. Consider this. When you give, do you give from a place of fullness, or do you give to fill a void within? The distinction is profound. Modern psychology, with its focus on self-compassion, aligns with Jung's wisdom. Authentic empathy flows from a heart that knows its own worth. The empath who learns to say no, to prioritize their own needs, discovers a paradox. Boundaries strengthen connection, not weaken it. By honoring their own limits, they offer others the gift of authenticity, a relationship built on truth rather than sacrifice. This is the alchemy of individuation, where the shadow's lessons are woven into the self's unfolding. Yet the shadow resists this integration. It cloaks itself in guilt, in the fear of being seen as selfish or uncaring. If I step back, will they still love me? If I claim my space, will I be alone? These questions haunt the empath, but Jung's teachings offer clarity. The soul's journey is not about pleasing others, but about becoming whole. The empath who dares to face these fears begins to weave a new narrative, one where empathy is an act of strength, not depletion. They learn that the collective unconscious does not demand their dissolution. It calls for their presence, their unique light. The archetypes within the caregiver, the warrior, the sage, must dance together, each given its due. The empath's true power lies in this balance. Their ability to feel the world's pulse is a sacred gift, but it must be wielded with discernment. To betray oneself in the name of empathy is to offer a half-light to the world. To honor oneself is to shine, fully illuminating paths for others without losing one's own. The journey is not about perfection, but about awareness, about choosing to love both self and other with equal devotion. The empath's soul, a prism refracting the collective unconscious, catches the light of humanity's shared dreams and despairs. Their heart, attuned to the silent cries of others, becomes a vessel for the world's unspoken truths. Yet in this sacred sensitivity lies a hidden peril. When empathy flows without boundaries, it risks eroding the self's foundation, leaving the empath adrift in a sea of others' needs. Jung's path of individuation calls for a deeper reckoning, not a retreat from compassion, but a fierce embrace of the self as equally worthy of care. To give without losing oneself is to walk the edge of a blade where shadow and light converge in the soul's quest for wholeness. The shadow, Jung's keeper of the psyche's denied truths, holds a mirror to the empath's quiet betrayal. It is not their generosity that undermines them, but their refusal to claim their own space. Their fear that saying no will unravel the fragile threads of connection. This shadow often cloaks itself in noble guises: duty, love, selflessness. But beneath lies a deeper truth. The empath's compulsion to give is often a flight from their own unhealed wounds. The exhaustion, the resentment, the sudden flare of anger after years of silent giving, these are the shadow's voice crying out for recognition. Have you ever felt that quiet fracture, that moment when your heart gives more than it can bear? That fracture is the psyche's plea urging you to turn inward and face what you've buried. Attachment theory, a modern lens on the soul's relational dance, illuminates the roots of this pattern. Many empaths carry the echoes of early relationships where love was a currency earned through caretaking or emotional sacrifice. The ego, shaped by these dynamics, learns to seek validation through giving, believing that to pause to prioritize the self is to risk rejection. This belief drives the empath to project their own needs onto others, seeking redemption through their healing. They may rush to mend a loved one's pain, not solely out of compassion, but to quiet their own fear of being unlovable. This is the subtle alchemy of self-betrayal, where empathy becomes a mask for avoiding the self's deeper truths. Individuation. Jung's sacred journey toward wholeness demands that the empath confront this dynamic. To become whole is to integrate the shadow, to honor the self's needs with the same reverence offered to others. The collective unconscious, with its archetypes of the healer, the lover, and the hero, pulses through the empath's sensitivity. Yet without anchoring in their own individuality, they risk becoming a mirror for the world's pain, their own story lost. To individuate is to claim one's own voice, to say, "I am enough, and my pain matters too." This requires the courage to set boundaries, to disappoint others, to trust that true connection thrives on authenticity, not sacrifice. Pause and reflect when you give. Do you give from a place of strength, or do you give to silence a fear within? The difference is a revelation. Modern psychology, with its emphasis on self-worth, echoes Jung's wisdom. True empathy flows from a heart that knows its own value. The empath who learns to hold their own pain with tenderness discovers a profound truth. Boundaries are not walls, but bridges fostering connection rooted in mutual respect. This is the work of shadow integration, where the empath learns to dance with their own needs, weaving them into the tapestry of their compassion. This dance is not without struggle. The shadow resists exposure, whispering guilt or fear of abandonment. If I say no, will they still need me? If I claim my space, will I be alone? Yet Jung's teachings offer a guiding light. The soul's journey is not about pleasing others, but about becoming whole. The empath who faces these fears begins to craft a new story, one where empathy is an act of power, not depletion. They learn that the collective unconscious does not demand their dissolution. It calls for their presence, their unique spark. The archetypes within the caregiver, the warrior, the sage, must coexist, each given its rightful place. The empath's gift, when balanced, is a radiant force. Their ability to feel the world's heartbeat is a bridge to understanding, a testament to the soul's capacity for connection. But to betray oneself in the name of empathy is to dim that radiance, to offer a fractured light to the world. The journey of individuation asks for more: to love others fiercely, yes, but to love oneself with equal fervor. The individual who truly understands their depths extends that grace to the world.